When my roommate's father took me out to dinner, I never expected it to lead to something that could ruin everything. What happens when a forbidden attraction spirals out of control? Will I risk my friendship for a man I can't resist? Stay tuned and let me know where you're watching from. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the soft glow of the candlelight. Across from me, Mr. Calloway sat with a calm, unreadable expression, but his eyes told a different story. They lingered, taking their time tracing the curve of my lips, the slope of my neck. I should have felt guilty for being here, but the thrill of the moment drowned out every rational thought. The evening had started off innocent enough, or at least that's what I told myself. Jessica, my best friend and roommate, had offhandedly mentioned her father was back in town and wanted to take me out to dinner. She had spoken about it so casually, like it was just another errand to run, another meal to share. "He probably just wants to talk about your future," she'd said, tossing a pair of leggings into the laundry basket. "You know, all that what's next after college stuff." He loves giving advice. I had nodded, pretending it was no big deal, when in reality my stomach had twisted in anticipation. Mr. Calloway had always been something of an enigma. Wealthy, well-spoken, effortlessly charming. Every time he visited Jessica, he exuded a quiet confidence, a presence that drew people in. He was in his late 40s, divorced, and somehow seemed untouched by time. His sharp features and broad shoulders made him look more like a man in his prime rather than someone approaching 50. And I had always noticed him, but I had never let myself acknowledge what that meant. Not until tonight. The dinner that shouldn't have happened. I should have known the moment I stepped out of my apartment, dressed in a fitted black dress that hugged me a little too perfectly, that I was already playing with fire. The moment he saw me, his gaze flickering down my body just briefly before meeting my eyes with that same unreadable expression, I knew I wasn't imagining things. At the restaurant, everything felt like a game we weren't willing to name. We started with casual conversation. "How's school going?" he asked, swirling his own glass of wine, his voice smooth and deliberate. "Good," I answered, but my voice came out softer than I intended. "I'm almost done with finals, and then it's just figuring out what's next." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the white tablecloth. "And what is next?" I shrugged, trying to seem unbothered, though I was hyper-aware of how close he was, of the way my skin felt too warm under his attention. "Grad school, maybe, or a job in publishing." "I could make a call," he offered, and for a split second I felt my heart jump at the thought of seeing him again, of a reason to keep this connection. I took a slow sip of my wine, tilting my head slightly. That wouldn't be fair. I should earn it myself. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like amusement. "You're stubborn. And you're used to getting what you want," I countered, emboldened by the second glass of wine. His silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, before he finally spoke. The game we pretended not to play. By the time we reached the entree, the air between us had shifted. I wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe when our hands had briefly touched as I passed him the breadbasket, or maybe when he had leaned in closer than necessary to hear me over the soft murmur of the restaurant. Whatever it was, we both felt it, and neither of us acknowledged it. I laughed at his dry humor, and he watched me with something unreadable in his gaze. His fingers tapped slowly against his glass, like he was measuring his words before speaking. "Jessica tells me you've been helping her with the move," he said, his voice even. I nodded. "Yeah, she's been stressing about getting everything packed before the lease is up." "He's lucky to have you," he said, and for some reason that simple sentence sent a shiver down my spine. I shouldn't have read into it, but I did. I shouldn't have let myself feel flattered, but I was. And when the waiter came to clear the plates, asking if we wanted dessert, I should have declined. But instead, I turned to Mr. Calloway with a teasing smile. "Are you a dessert guy?" He raised a brow. "That depends on what's being offered." The weight of his words pressed against me, making my stomach tighten. And when he ordered something chocolate, making a comment about how I should try it because it was too good to eat alone, I knew exactly what kind of game we were playing. A ride that should have ended differently. After dinner, he insisted on driving me home. I could have said no. I could have called a cab, made up an excuse, done anything to avoid being alone with him again. But I didn't. The car was quiet as he drove, the city lights flashing past in streaks of gold and red. The soft hum of the radio filled the silence, but it did nothing to settle the storm in my chest. He was too composed, too controlled, and it only made me feel more reckless. I watched him from the corner of my eye, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed against the steering wheel. "Thank you for dinner," I said softly, breaking the silence. He glanced at me briefly, something flickering across his face before he turned back to the road. "It was my pleasure." Another stretch of silence. Then his voice, lower, quieter. "I shouldn't have asked you out." My breath hitched. "Why?" He exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. "Because it makes things complicated." I turned to face him fully, pulse thrumming. "Does it have to be?" He slowed the car at a red light, and for the first time all night, he looked at me like he wasn't holding back, like he wasn't pretending anymore. For a moment, I thought he might say something final, something that would put an end to this before it even started. But when the light turned green, he just pressed his lips together and drove. When we reached my apartment, he put the car in park but didn't unlock the doors. A beat of silence. Then, slowly, he turned toward me. I should have opened the door. I should have thanked him again and walked away. But instead I stayed. And when he reached over, his fingers grazing my cheek before tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear, my breath caught. "This is a bad idea," he murmured, but his hand lingered. I swallowed hard. "I know." Neither of us moved. And that's when I knew this was only the beginning. His fingers still lingered against my skin, barely touching, but sending a pulse of electricity down my spine. My breath was shallow, my lips parted slightly, waiting, daring him to make the next move. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled back, his jaw tightening as if he was forcing himself to remember exactly who I was, his daughter's best friend. His eyes flickered with hesitation, but the tension between us was undeniable, suffocating. I should have opened the car door. I should have stepped out and pretended this night had been nothing more than a simple dinner, but something in me refused to move, as if leaving now would break whatever spell had been cast over us. "I should go," I finally whispered, my voice betraying the war raging inside me. His hand dropped from my face, but he didn't look away. "You should," he agreed, but he didn't move either. A silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, as if we were waiting for one of us to break, to admit what we both already knew. I forced myself to grab the door handle, pushing it open just enough to let in the cool night air. But before I could step out, his voice stopped me. "Wait." I turned back, pulse hammering in my chest. He hesitated for a moment, fingers tapping against the steering wheel as if he was weighing his next words carefully. Then, with a quiet exhale, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. "If you ever need anything," he said, sliding it into my hand, "call me." I stared down at the card, his name embossed in silver, his number printed neatly below it. It was nothing. It was everything. I swallowed hard and met his gaze one last time before stepping out of the car, shutting the door behind me. As I walked up to my apartment, I could still feel his eyes on me. The text I shouldn't have sent. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my fingers tracing the edge of the card he had given me. My heart was still racing, my mind replaying every lingering glance, every near touch, every moment where the lines between us blurred. I knew I should forget about it, forget about him, but instead I found myself unlocking my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I shouldn't. I hesitated, then, before I could stop myself, typed out a message. Me, thank you for dinner. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding against my ribs. The 3 little dots appeared almost instantly. Mr. Calloway, any time. I chewed on my lip, debating whether to respond, whether to push just a little further. And then, against all logic, I did. Me, I can't stop thinking about tonight. The dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Mr. Calloway, neither can I. A rush of heat spread through me. This wasn't just in my head, it wasn't just me. I should have left it at that. I should have put my phone down and pretended this conversation never happened. But I didn't. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as if nothing had changed. As if I hadn't spent half the night waiting for my phone to light up, for him to say something, anything that would tell me I wasn't completely out of my mind. Jessica and I sat on the couch, flipping through a mindless reality show, but I could barely focus. You okay? She asked, glancing at me. I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. She stretched her legs out, yawning. My dad asked about you today. My stomach dropped. Oh? She nodded, grabbing her phone. Yeah, he said he enjoyed catching up with you last night. She rolled her eyes. I told him you're not his daughter. He doesn't have to check in on you like you're part of his responsibility. I let out a breathy laugh, masking the sudden tightness in my chest. He was just being polite. Jessica snorted. Please, he likes you. He told me you're impressive. I've never heard him say that about anyone under 40. I swallowed, trying to keep my face neutral. That's nice of him. She shrugged. Anyway, I need to shower. You good out here? I nodded, my heart still pounding as she disappeared down the hall. As soon as she was gone, my phone vibrated. I grabbed it instantly. Mr. Calloway, are you free tonight? My throat went dry. I stared at the message, the weight of what he was asking pressing down on me. This was a line I couldn't uncross. And yet, where? The response was almost instant. Mr. Calloway, my place. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, already knowing what my answer would be. The place I shouldn't have gone. By the time I reached his penthouse, the sun had dipped below the skyline, leaving the city bathed in a soft, golden glow. My hands trembled as I knocked, my breath caught somewhere between nerves and anticipation. The door opened almost immediately. Mr. Calloway stood there, sleeves rolled up, top button undone, his hair slightly mussed like he had run his hands through it one too many times. For a moment we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, letting me in. I walked past him, the scent of him, woodsy, clean, intoxicating, wrapping around me. The door clicked shut behind me. A silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, I shouldn't have asked you here, he murmured, his voice low, almost reluctant. I turned, meeting his gaze. Then why did you? His jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. Because I can't stop thinking about you. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could second-guess myself, I stepped closer. You're Jessica's father, I whispered, as if saying it out loud would break whatever this was between us. And you're her best friend, he countered. Neither of us moved. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out, his fingers brushing against my wrist, then trailing up my arm, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. I should walk away, he murmured. I swallowed, so should I. His fingers curled around my waist, drawing me in. I don't think I can, he admitted, his breath warm against my skin. A pause. Then, neither of us did, and his fingers pressed into my waist, firm but hesitant, as if he were testing the boundaries of what we were about to do. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow as I stood there, inches from him, every nerve ending in my body waiting, anticipating. We weren't supposed to be here, but neither of us was willing to stop. I should go, I whispered, but even as I said it, my hands betrayed me, fingertips grazing up his arms, feeling the tense muscles beneath his shirt. His grip on me tightened just slightly, his body rigid. Tell me you want to, and I'll let you. I didn't say a word, because we both knew I wasn't leaving. His jaw tensed, his breath slow and measured as if he were trying to regain control of himself. But it was pointless. The moment had already swallowed us whole. And then he moved. It wasn't rushed or desperate. No, it was deliberate, controlled. His hand slid up my back, fingers grazing my exposed skin, sending a shiver through me. His lips hovered just above mine, not quite touching, just breathing the same air, waiting. I tilted my chin up, my hands moving to his chest. My pulse roared in my ears as I felt the warmth of his breath against my lips. The anticipation was unbearable, the tension between us crackling like static. And then, finally, his lips met mine, slow, searching, testing the waters before deepening into something that made my knees weaken beneath me. I should have felt guilty. I should have thought of Jessica, but all I could think about was the way he felt against me, the way his hands slid down my waist, pulling me closer. I let myself melt into him, my body pressed against his as his hands roamed, exploring, learning me like I was something forbidden he had finally decided to claim. A dangerous game. Somewhere between the taste of him and the feel of his fingers tracing my spine, a thought crept into my mind. This wasn't going to stop at just tonight. This was dangerous, reckless, addictive. But as his lips traveled down the curve of my jaw, pressing slow, deliberate kisses against my skin, I realized I didn't care. Not right now. Not when he was making me feel like this. His hands gripped my hips, walking me backward until the edge of the sofa hit the backs of my knees. I gasped as I fell back, but he was there, hovering over me, his gaze dark and unreadable. Are you sure? He asked, his voice strained, like he was fighting against the very thing he wanted. I reached for him, pulling him down to me. Yes. And just like that, the last bit of restraint shattered. The morning after. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. I blinked against the light, momentarily disoriented by my surroundings. The sheets were soft, the air smelled like expensive cologne and fresh linen, and then memories of last night came rushing back. I turned my head, and there he was, Mr. Calloway. His face was relaxed in sleep, the sharpness of his features softened in the early morning light. Panic should have hit me, guilt should have sunk its claws in, but all I felt was warmth, lingering traces of his touch still imprinted on my skin. I lay there for a moment, watching him, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. What had we done? What did this mean? The sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand shattered the quiet. Jet. My stomach twisted. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I read her message. Jessica, are you up? I need coffee and gossip. Meet me at the cafe in 30. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. Gossip. If only she knew. I turned to look at Mr. Calloway again, my pulse thrumming in my throat. As if sensing my gaze, his eyes fluttered open. meeting mine with a lazy sort of awareness. His lips curved slightly, voice rough from sleep. Morning. I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. His hand slid over my waist, pulling me closer, as if last night hadn't been a mistake, as if this was something we could wake up to every morning. But we couldn't. I couldn't. I have to go, I whispered, my voice barely steady. His hand stilled, but he didn't stop me as I sat up, wrapping the sheet around me. Jessica? He asked, reading the tension in my expression. I nodded. She wants to meet. A long pause. Then, are you going to tell her? I turned to face him, my heart hammering. No. His eyes darkened slightly, something flickering behind them that I couldn't quite read. Then what happens now? He asked. I exhaled slowly, my mind scrambling for an answer. I don't know, I admitted, and that was the truth. I didn't know where this would lead, how long I could keep it a secret, or what would happen if Jessica found out. But what I did know, this wasn't over. Not even close. I barely made it out of Mr. Calloway's penthouse before reality crashed down on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped into the elevator, gripping my phone tightly. Jessica was waiting. I tried to ignore the lingering heat on my skin, the way my body still hummed from his touch. But the deeper I sank into the silence of the elevator, the harder it became to pretend that nothing had happened. Because something had happened. Something I couldn't take back. And the worst part? I didn't want to. The door slid open, and I stepped out into the crisp morning air. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I hailed a cab. The city bustled around me, but all I could focus on was the weight of what I had done, what we had done. As the cab pulled away from the curb, my phone vibrated again. Jessica, I'm already at the cafe. Hurry up, Slowpoke. I exhaled sharply. 30 minutes ago, I had been in her father's bed. And now I had to sit across from her and pretend like my world hadn't just been flipped upside down. A coffee date with guilt. By the time I reached the cafe, Jessica was already at our usual table, a large iced coffee in front of her. She waved me over, her expression bright and cheerful, completely oblivious to the secret I carried. You look exhausted, she said as I sat down, eyeing me over her straw. Late night? I forced a laugh, hoping she couldn't hear the panic in my voice. Something like that. She smirked. Did you finally hook up with someone? I nearly choked on my sip of coffee. What? Jessica rolled her eyes, propping her chin in her hand. Come on, I know you've been stressed. A little distraction wouldn't kill you. If only she knew. I swallowed hard, forcing a casual shrug. No distractions. Just a long night of overthinking. It wasn't technically a lie. Jessica groaned. You need to get out of your head. Maybe I should set you up with someone. I stiffened. That's really not necessary. She sighed dramatically. You're so stubborn. Then, after a beat, she added, Oh, speaking of men, my dad mentioned you again. My stomach dropped. I kept my expression neutral, barely managing a sip of coffee. Yeah? She nodded. Yeah, he said he really enjoyed catching up with you at dinner. Then, narrowing her eyes, she smirked. You sure he wasn't flirting with you? The words sent a chill down my spine. Jessica was joking, obviously, but for a split second I was certain she could see right through me. I forced a laugh. Oh, come on. Your dad? That would be weird. She laughed too, shaking her head. I know, but I swear sometimes I think he gets lonely. He needs to start dating again or something. I swallowed hard, gripping my cup a little too tightly. Yeah, maybe. She didn't notice my tension. Instead, she changed the subject, diving into a rant about her upcoming move and how stressed she was. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. I had lied to her face, and I had gotten away with it. crossing the line again. I told myself it was a one-time thing. That morning, as I walked home from the cafe, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let it happen again. I wouldn't answer his text. I wouldn't let myself get pulled back into the dangerous gravity of Mr. Calloway. But that promise lasted all of 3 days. Because on the fourth night, just as I was about to go to bed, my phone vibrated. "Mr. Calloway, can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. I should have ignored it. But instead, neither can I. The response came quickly. "Mr. Calloway." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was reckless, stupid, but I was already reaching for my coat. A secret that wasn't so secret. It became routine. Late-night texts, sneaking away when Jessica was asleep, mornings tangled in silk sheets before I rushed home, pretending nothing had happened. It was dangerous, addictive, and completely out of control. I told myself I had it handled, that no one would ever find out. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and mine unraveled faster than I ever expected. It happened on a Thursday. I had just left Mr. Calloway's penthouse, my body still humming from his touch, my lips swollen from the kisses we had stolen between whispered warnings. I stepped into the elevator, fixing my coat, smoothing my hair, making sure there was no trace of him left on me. But as the doors slid open, I froze. Jessica was standing in the lobby. Her expression shifted instantly. Confusion, surprise, then something colder. My heart plummeted. I opened my mouth, searching for something to say, some excuse, some lie. But before I could, she spoke. "What the hell are you doing here?" The world around me tilted, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. I had been caught, and there was no way out of it now. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stood frozen in the doorway of the elevator, staring at Jessica. The sharp, disbelieving look on her face sent panic clawing up my throat. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Jessica's eyes flickered to my slightly disheveled coat, the way I was smoothing my hair, adjusting my bag. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. She knew. I forced a weak smile, scrambling for anything that would make this look less damning. "Jess," I started, my voice thin, brittle. What are you doing here?" Her arms folded tightly across her chest. "I could ask you the same thing." I swallowed hard, stepping out of the elevator, feeling as if the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't lie to her, not outright, but I had to give her something. My voice faltered, "I was just, I needed to talk to your dad about something." Jessica let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. At this hour, her gaze darkened and she took a step closer. "You expect me to believe that?" I hesitated for a second too long. Her face twisted. "Oh, my God." "You were with him." The words came out quiet, like she was still processing them, but there was an undeniable sharpness to her tone. "Weren't you?" I opened my mouth to deny it, to give her anything that would soften the truth, but the lie wouldn't come. Because she was right, and she knew it. The air between us felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of unspoken accusations. Jessica's lips parted as if she wanted to say something else, maybe scream at me, maybe demand some kind of explanation, but instead she just shook her head. "I can't believe this," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You? With my dad?" I reached out instinctively, but she recoiled like my touch would burn her. "Jess, please, it's not what you think." "Oh, really?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Because it looks exactly like what I think." I sucked in a shaky breath. "I never meant for this to happen." She scoffed. "Oh, so what, you just tripped and fell into bed with him?" My stomach twisted. I didn't have an answer for that. Jessica's expression hardened, her eyes burning with something I'd never seen directed at me before. Betrayal. You knew he was off limits, she hissed. You knew, and you still did this. Guilt sank its claws into me. I didn't plan this, I said weakly. I didn't, but you let it happen. Her voice cracked, and suddenly I hated myself even more. Silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. Jessica exhaled shakily, pressing her fingers to her temple as if she was trying to make sense of the mess unraveling before her. I need to go, she muttered, stepping back. Jess, please. Oh. Her eyes flicked back up to mine, glassy with unshed tears. I can't. I don't even want to look at you right now. And just like that, she turned and walked away. I stood there, rooted to the cold marble floor, watching her disappear through the lobby doors, my chest tightening with a pain I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to shake. A mistake that couldn't be undone. I don't remember how I got home. The walk was a blur, the city lights blurred around me, the night air too sharp, too cold. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking. I locked the door behind me, then pressed my back against it, exhaling shakily. I had ruined everything. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone, hesitating for a long moment before unlocking it. My thumb hovered over Jessica's contact, but I couldn't bring myself to text her. What would I even say? I'm sorry? Didn't mean to happen? No apology would be enough to erase what I had done. With a heavy sigh, I backed out of her messages and opened another. Me, she knows. It didn't take long for the dots to appear. Mr. Calloway? How? I swallowed hard. Me, she saw me leaving. A beat of silence. Then, Mr. Calloway, do you want me to talk to her? I hesitated, my fingers tightening around my phone. Would that even help? Would it make things worse? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I had to face this on my own. Me? No, just give her time. Another pause. Then, Mr. Calloway, are you okay? I stared at the message for a long time, my throat tightening. No, I wasn't, but I couldn't say that. So instead, I turned off my phone and let the silence swallow me whole. The fallout. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Jessica refused to speak to me. She didn't block my number, but she didn't respond to my texts either. When I passed her in the apartment, she barely spared me a glance. The air was thick with unspoken words, with anger and disappointment and everything I wished I could take back. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to go back to the night of the dinner, to the moment in the car when I could have walked away. But it was too late. And the worst part, I wasn't even sure if I regretted it. Because despite everything, despite the fallout, despite the guilt pressing against my ribs, I still wanted him. I still checked my phone, waiting for his name to light up the screen. I still replayed the way he had looked at me that night, the way his hands had felt against my skin. I still ached for him, and that was the real betrayal. Not just to Jessica, but to myself. Jessica's presence still lingered, but she moved through the space like a ghost, silent, avoiding eye contact, barely acknowledging my existence. It was worse than if she'd yelled at me, worse than if she'd called me names, worse than if she'd thrown my things out onto the street. She was shutting me out completely. I wanted to fix it, but every attempt was met with cold indifference. And it hurt, because for all the mistakes I had made, losing my best friend was the one that cut the deepest. The breaking point. It had been a week since she saw me leaving her father's penthouse. 7 days of silence. 7 days of tiptoeing around each other like strangers. But the breaking point came on a Friday night. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, when Jessica walked into the living room. She was dressed up. Heels, a sleek black dress, her makeup flawless. She looked amazing. I sat up. Going out? She barely glanced at me. Yeah, Cool. She grabbed her purse and finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. I don't think that's any of your business. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Jess, can we talk? Her jaw clenched, but she let out a humorless laugh. Talk? Now you want to talk? I nodded, feeling hopeful, desperate even. Please. She exhaled sharply and crossed her arms. Fine. Talk. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to string together the words that would make this better. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you. Jessica scoffed. But you did. I flinched. You slept with my dad, she spat, her voice dripping with disbelief and disgust. How am I supposed to just get over that? I bit my lip, shame clawing at my insides. I know, I messed up. Her eyes burned into mine. Is it still happening? My breath caught. Are you still seeing him? She pressed. I hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Jessica let out a hollow laugh. Wow, unbelievable. I shook my head, panic creeping in. Jess, Save it. She grabbed her purse, heading for the door. I can't even look at you right now. And just like that, she was gone. I sat there, staring at the door, feeling the full weight of what I had done settle over me. I was losing her, and I didn't know how to stop it. The unexpected call. I was still sitting there, lost in thought, when my phone vibrated. My heart stuttered when I saw his name on the screen. Mr. Calloway. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But my fingers moved before I could stop them, pressing the phone to my ear. I hesitated before speaking. Hey. His voice was deep, steady. Are you okay? I let out a shaky breath. No. A pause. Then, Jessica. I closed my eyes. She hates me. Another silence stretched between us. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I'm sorry. I laughed bitterly. Are you? Because I don't even know what we're doing anymore. A beat of silence. Then, do you regret it? I opened my mouth, ready to say yes, but I couldn't, because even now, with everything falling apart, with Jessica slipping away, I couldn't bring myself to wish it away. So instead, I whispered the truth. Oh, he exhaled slowly. Neither do I. The admission sent a shiver down my spine. I should have ended the call. I should have told him this was over. But instead, I asked, can I see you? And his answer came without hesitation. Yes. The night that changed everything. I arrived at his penthouse an hour later. I told myself I just needed clarity, that I needed to see him, to talk to him, to understand what this was, what we were. But the second he opened the door, I knew talking wasn't what I wanted. His eyes searched mine, reading everything I wasn't saying. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me. And before I could think, before I could second guess, I reached for him. His hands were on me instantly, pulling me closer, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was anything but uncertain. It was hungry, desperate, like we both knew we were teetering on the edge of something neither of us could control. And I didn't care. Not about Jessica, not about consequences, not about anything except the way he made me feel. The morning after again. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the massive windows, tangled in soft sheets, my body still humming from the night before. But this time, reality hit differently. I turned my head, finding Mr. Calloway already awake, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Morning, he murmured. I swallowed, suddenly nervous. Morning. His fingers brushed over my bare shoulder, a soft touch that sent shivers through me. How are you feeling? I hesitated. I don't know. His brows furrowed slightly. Do you regret it? I should have, but I didn't. No, I admitted. But I don't know what happens now. He exhaled, sitting up. Neither do I. I stared at him, searching his face. Then what are we doing? He was quiet for a long moment, then finally, something we probably shouldn't. I let out a small, breathy laugh. Yeah. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. But I don't want to stop. My heart skipped. Neither did I, even if it meant losing everything else. Even if it meant losing Jessica. The first true consequence. That thought haunted me the rest of the day. I tried texting Jessica, but she ignored me. I tried calling, no answer. Then, that night, it happened. I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly flipping through my phone when I saw it. A social media post. A picture of Jessica. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting at a bar, a drink in her hand, and leaning just slightly toward the man beside her, Mr. Calloway's business partner. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. This wasn't an accident. Jessica was making a point. She was getting back at me. And suddenly I realized this wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a war. The image of Jessica at the bar burned into my mind. Her lips curved into a knowing smirk, her posture too casual, too intentional. But it wasn't just the fact that she was out, it was who she was with, Mr. Calloway's business partner, Ethan Graves. Ethan was charming in a cold, detached way. He was a little younger than Mr. Calloway, in his early 40s, and always had this air of effortless confidence. I had met him once, in passing, and he had barely acknowledged me. But now he was leaning in close to Jessica, his hand on the small of her back like he already knew the role he was meant to play in all of this. My fingers tightened around my phone, my breath shallow. This wasn't just Jessica moving on. This was a move, a calculated move, and it was aimed directly at me. The confrontation. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was her, laughing, flirting, giving Ethan the same kind of attention she used to give me when we stayed up talking about nothing and everything. By the time morning came, I was done waiting. I needed answers. I waited until I heard her stirring in her room before I made my move. My hands were clenched at my sides as I walked down the hallway, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I knocked once before pushing her door open. Jessica was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone, her legs crossed beneath her. She looked up when she saw me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then I lifted my phone, the image of her and Ethan glowing on the screen. Seriously? She arched a brow, unfazed. Good morning to you, too. I stepped further inside, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. What? She said, shrugging. I went out, I had fun. Feeling grounded, I snapped. Her eyes darkened and she sat up straighter. Why do you care? I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. Oh, come on. Don't act like this was some random night out. You knew what you were doing. Jessica's lips twitched, but it wasn't amusement. It was something colder. Yeah, she admitted. I did. The honesty knocked the air from my lungs. I swallowed, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. Why? She tilted her head, considering me. Because now you know what it feels like. My stomach twisted. Jessica scoffed, setting her phone aside. You don't get to act shocked, she said, her voice sharp. You slept with my dad. I flinched at the word. She stood up, arms folding across her chest. You ruined everything, and now you're mad that I'm going out with someone? I let out a shaky breath, struggling to find the right words. I don't want you to do something just to get back at me. She let out a dry, humorless laugh, Oh, you don't want me to make a mistake? Her eyes narrowed. That's rich. My throat tightened. Jessica took a step closer, her voice quieter now, but more dangerous. You didn't just betray me. You lied to me. You snuck around. You pretended nothing was happening while you were sleeping with my father behind my back. I opened my mouth to respond, but she shook her head. I don't even know who you are anymore. The words sliced through me. I felt my shoulders sag, my heart aching. Jess, But she held up a hand. No, she said, her voice firm. I don't want to hear it. We're done. My breath caught. Done? Jessica's expression didn't waver. As friends, as roommates, she exhaled, rubbing her forehead. I'll give you a month to figure things out, but after that, I want you out. The world tilted. Everything inside me screamed to fix this, to fight for our friendship, but I could see it in her eyes. She had already made up her mind. I had lost her, and this time, there was no undoing it. The fallout. I walked out of her room in a daze. The walls of our apartment felt suffocating now, the weight of our history pressing down on me. I had spent years building this friendship with her, years of laughter, secrets, late-night talks, and unconditional support. And now, because of one mistake, no, many mistakes, it was all crumbling. I sat down on the couch, my hands gripping my knees. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had done. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about trust, and I had shattered it. My phone vibrated on the table beside me. I ignored it at first, staring blankly ahead, but when it buzzed again, I reached for it. Mr. Calloway, did she talk to you? I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the phone. Yeah. Mr. Calloway, how bad is it? I let out a slow breath. She wants me to move out. The dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Mr. Calloway, I'm sorry. My chest ached. I didn't know what I expected him to say, maybe an offer, stay with me, we'll figure this out together. But it didn't come, and maybe that was for the best, because I was starting to wonder if this wasn't just about Jessica anymore. Maybe this was about me, what I had done, what I had become, and whether I was ready to live with that. A choice I had to make. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had spent so much time tangled up in the forbidden, in the thrill of sneaking around, in the intoxicating pull of something I wasn't supposed to have. But now all I had was the wreckage. I had lost Jessica. And as much as I wanted to pretend that Mr. Calloway was worth it, I wasn't sure anymore. Not because I didn't want him, but because I didn't know who I was when I was with him. And if I kept going down this road, I wasn't sure I'd ever find my way back. I turned over, reaching for my phone. My fingers hovered over his name. I had a choice to make. Stay in the flames, or walk away before I burned everything else down. I inhaled deeply. Then, before I could change my mind, I typed out a message. And this time, I knew exactly what I needed to say. I stared at my phone for what felt like forever, the message typed but not yet sent. I can't do this anymore. The words blurred together, my thumb hovering over the send button. It felt final, too final. I wanted to erase it, to pretend I hadn't written it, but wasn't this what needed to happen? Hadn't I already lost too much? Jessica was gone. My home was gone, and now I had to accept that Mr. Calloway, this dangerous, intoxicating, utterly forbidden affair, had to be gone too. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, then exhaled, and with a quiet, painful resolve, I hit send. Seconds passed, then minutes. The dots appeared on my screen, then disappeared, appeared again. Then nothing. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe silence was the answer I needed. A goodbye that wasn't a goodbye. I spent the next few days packing. Jessica wasn't around much, which was probably for the best. The few times we crossed paths, she barely looked at me. It was like I was a ghost, a stain in her past that she couldn't wait to erase. I hated it, but I understood it. On my last night in the apartment, I sat on the bare mattress of my bed, staring at my nearly empty room. This had been home for years. Now it was just another place I had to leave behind. A soft knock at my door startled me. For a moment, my heart jumped. Jessica? But when I opened it, my stomach twisted in an entirely different way. Mr. Calloway stood there, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. I sucked in a sharp breath. What are you doing here? His gaze flickered over me, taking in the half-packed boxes, the bare walls. Then his eyes met mine, dark and heavy. You weren't going to say goodbye. I swallowed hard, gripping the door frame. I thought it'd be easier this way. For who? He asked, stepping closer. I hesitated. For both of us. His jaw tensed. You really believe that? I did. I had to. I straightened my shoulders, forcing myself to meet his gaze. This isn't working. It never was. Something flickered in his expression. Hurt maybe, or frustration. This wasn't just some mistake, he said quietly. Not for me. My throat tightened. No, I whispered. He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. Then don't walk away. I squeezed my eyes shut. I have to. Silent. Then, finally, he nodded. If that's what you want. I looked at him, memorizing his face, the way his lips pressed into a tight line, the way his eyes burned with something I couldn't name. This was the right choice. It had to be. Goodbye, Mr. Calloway. His expression hardened, but he nodded once. Goodbye. And just like that, he turned and walked away. I closed the door. Then, slowly, painfully, I slid down to the floor, pressing my forehead to my knees. It was over. For real this time. Starting over. Moving into a new apartment should have felt like a fresh start. But it didn't. It felt hollow. I spent my days drowning myself in work, keeping my mind occupied with anything that didn't involve Jessica or Mr. Calloway. Jessica had fully moved on. She still didn't speak to me, but through mutual friends I knew she was doing fine. Better than fine. And Mr. Calloway, he kept his distance. No texts, no calls. It was like we had never existed. And maybe that was for the best. One night I sat alone on my new couch, staring at my phone. My fingers hovered over his name, the temptation still there, still strong. But I knew better now. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. I took a deep breath, then did the hardest thing I had done yet. I deleted his number. It was time to move forward. No more looking back. No more what if. Just me, starting over, alone. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I kept telling myself I had done the right thing, that I had made the right choice, that walking away from Mr. Calloway was the only way to fix the mess I had created. But the truth? It still hurt. Some nights I would lie awake in my new apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The first dinner, the stolen glances, the whispered confessions, the way he had made me feel like the only thing that mattered when we were together. But memories weren't enough. Not anymore. I had made my decision. And now I had to live with it. Closure. A month passed. Then 2. Jessica never reached out. And Mr. Calloway? Silence. At first, it was agonizing. I kept expecting my phone to light up, to hear from him, to find some excuse to see him again. But with each passing day, the ache in my chest dulled, little by little. I buried myself in work, I reconnected with old friends, and slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild. One night, I was walking home from a bookstore when I saw him. Mr. Calloway. He was across the street, standing outside a restaurant, deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, elegant, poised, the kind of woman who belonged in his world. Something inside me twisted, but I forced myself to keep walking. I didn't stop, I didn't stare, I just walked, because this was how it had to be, for both of us. An unexpected message. Another month passed. Then, one evening, just as I was settling onto my couch with a book, my phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting a work email or a text from a friend, but when I saw the name on the screen, my heart stopped. Mr. Calloway. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the message, my fingers trembling as I unlocked my phone. Mr. Calloway, I saw you today. I swallowed hard. I hadn't even noticed him, but he had seen me. I hesitated, then typed a response. Me, yeah? A beat of silence. Then, Mr. Calloway? You look good. I let out a shaky breath. This was danger. This was opening a door I had fought so hard to close. But I couldn't stop myself. Me? So do you. Another pause. Then, Mr. Calloway, are you happy? The question made my chest tighten. Was I? I had moved on, I had put the pieces of my life back together. But was I happy? I didn't know. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally typing out a response. Me. I'm getting there. His reply came almost instantly. Mr. Calloway, good. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't a beginning. It wasn't a second chance. It was closure. The final chapter of something beautiful, reckless, and forbidden. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Because some stories aren't meant to last forever. Some are just meant to be lived. And then let go. I thought that text was the last of it. That we had found closure.
That I could finally move on without looking back.
But life has a funny way of unraveling when you think you've tied everything up neatly. Because just 2 weeks after that message, I saw Jessica again. And she had news that shattered everything I thought I knew. The twist I never saw coming. It was a Saturday morning when it happened. I was sitting at my favorite cafe, lost in a book, when I felt someone standing beside me. I looked up, and my heart nearly stopped. Jessica? She looked different, stronger, more distant, but her eyes, those familiar, piercing eyes, still held the weight of our broken friendship. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. Hey. She didn't smile, didn't soften, she just slid into the seat across from me. I need to talk to you, she said. I hesitated, bracing myself. Okay. She exhaled, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. It's about my dad. Every muscle in my body tensed. Jessica, I'm not here to rehash the past, she interrupted, shaking her head. I don't care about that anymore. But there's something you need to know. A sinking feeling took root in my stomach. Jessica hesitated for a beat, then met my eyes. My dad, he's getting married. I blinked. What? She let out a breath like she had been holding it in for too long. Yeah, he proposed last week. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. To who? She gave me a long, measured look before saying her name. Emily. My blood turned to ice. Emily. His ex-wife, Jessica's mother. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. The world around me seemed to blur at the edges. Jessica watched me, her expression unreadable. I thought you should hear it from me.
I swallowed, my throat dry. Are you serious?
She nodded, dead serious. A million thoughts raced through my mind, but none of them made sense. He had gone back to her? After everything? And more than that, what did that mean for me? For us? For whatever twisted, broken thing we had left between us? Jessica studied me carefully as if gauging my reaction. Say something. I shook my head, my pulse roaring in my ears. I exhaled sharply. I don't know what to say. A bitter smile flickered across her lips. Now you know how it feels. I flinched. She stood, grabbing her coffee. Anyway, I've said what I needed to say. I wanted to stop her, to ask why, to ask how. But the truth was, it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. And now I was the one left picking up the pieces. The reflection. For days, I wrestled with it.
Why had he gone back to her?
Had I ever really meant anything? Had I just been a distraction, a temporary escape before he finally returned to the woman he had always belonged to? The questions haunted me. I tried to push them away, to bury them beneath work and routine and the life I was trying so hard to rebuild. But they lingered, and eventually I did the one thing I had promised myself I wouldn't. I reached out. Me, is it true? The dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then, Mr. Calloway, yes. That one-word response gutted me more than I wanted to admit. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers trembling over the keyboard. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I needed to say. But in the end, I only asked one question. Me, why? A full minute passed before his reply came. Mr. Calloway, because it was always going to end this way. My breath, I should have seen it coming. I should have known, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less.
I didn't respond.
I didn't need to, because that was the answer. That was our ending. And this time, it really was over. Moving forward. After that, something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for my phone to light up. I stopped lingering in the past, replaying memories that only brought me pain. I stopped wondering what if, because there were no more what ifs. There was only now, and I had a choice, to keep drowning in regret, or to finally move on.
I did.
I packed up the last remnants of him, of us, and put them away. Physically, emotionally. I started focusing on myself. I applied for a job in another city. I booked a solo trip, something I had always talked about but never had the courage to do. I went out, met new people, let myself laugh again. And slowly, so slowly, I started to heal. Not because I stopped missing him, not because the memories had faded, but because I had learned something I had spent so long trying to avoid. The final truth: love isn't always enough. No matter how deep the connection, no matter how intoxicating the passion, sometimes love is not enough to erase the damage. Sometimes people don't belong to you no matter how much you want them to. And sometimes the hardest thing to do, the bravest thing to do, is to let go completely without looking back. Because love should never come at the cost of yourself. And in the end, that was the real lesson. I had lost Jessica. I had lost Mr. Calloway. But in the process, I had found me. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.
Life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most painful, unexpected ways.
Some lessons are gentle, nudging us in the right direction. Others, They rip through us like a storm, leaving us to pick up the pieces and rebuild from the wreckage. This was one of those storms. And now, standing on the other side of it, I see things more clearly than I ever did before. I don't hate him. I don't hate Jessica. And I don't even hate myself anymore. Because every choice I made, every mistake, every moment of weakness, every reckless decision lead me to this moment. And for the first time in a long time, I know exactly who I am. To Jessica, I don't know if we'll ever speak again. Maybe in another lifetime, another reality, where I never crossed the line, where I never betrayed the trust we built. Maybe then we could have stayed best friends. But in this life, I lost you, and I accept that. Because no matter how much time passes, I will never pretend that I didn't hurt you. I did, and for that I am truly, deeply sorry. But I hope you know, I never wanted to break us. I never wanted to ruin the friendship that meant more to me than anything else. I was weak. I was selfish. I was foolish, and I paid the price for it. So, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you're happy.
I hope you've found love in a way that doesn't leave scars.
And I hope one day, if you ever think of me, it's not with anger, but with the distant fondness of something that once was. Because despite everything, I'll always be grateful for you, and I'll always miss you. To him, what we had was real, even if it was wrong, even if it wasn't meant to last. You made me feel things I never thought I could. You made me lose myself in ways that scared me, that changed me, that made me question everything I thought I knew about love and desire. And for a while, I thought that meant something, but now I realize some loves aren't meant to stay. Some are just meant to wake you up. And you woke me up. You taught me passion. You taught me consequences. And in the end, you taught me how to say goodbye. I don't regret you. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. But I won't chase you anymore. I won't look back. Because you were never meant to be mine. And I was never meant to be yours. To myself, I forgive you for being reckless, for making mistakes, for losing yourself in something that was never meant to last, for breaking your own heart just as much as you broke theirs. I forgive you, and I love you, not because you're perfect, but because you're learning, because you're growing, because you survived, and that's enough. A new beginning. Tomorrow I start over. A new city, a new apartment, a new life. I won't run from my past, but I won't be chained to it either. Because the truth is, I don't need a love that consumes me, that leaves me breathless, that makes me forget who I am. I need a love that reminds me, and one day I'll find that. But for now, I have myself, and that's enough. Goodbye, Jessica. Goodbye, Mr. Calloway. Goodbye to the girl I was. And hello to the woman I'm becoming. The final goodbye. I close my suitcase. I take one last look around my apartment, and I step forward, not into the past, not into regret, but into my future. And for the first time, I don't look back.